At 06:10, the sun hadn't yet burned off the chill in the high desert air. Rachel Dorne stood near the open tailgate of a Humvee, clipboard in hand, quietly ticking through the inventory of weapons and field kits. She wore standard OCPs, her sleeves rolled neatly above the wrist, and an olive drab fleece under her plate carrier. Her boots were dusty, her ball cap plain. She said nothing as soldiers bustled past, many too focused on their gear to even register her presence. Rachel was small, maybe 5'3" in boots. Slender, but not frail. Her brown hair was tied into a tight bun tucked beneath her cap. She moved deliberately, as if she'd done this 1,000 times before. She didn't make small talk, didn't correct anyone's setup, didn't slow anyone down. That should have been the first clue. Around her, the first group of Joint Force trainees had begun to gather in loose formation near the motor pool. A few of them glanced her way. One, a young Marine Lance Corporal adjusting the straps on his flak, leaned over to a buddy and smirked. Bet she gets winded lifting an ammo can. The other soldier, a National Guard infantryman with a thick Alabama drawl, snorted. Logistics. Translation clipboard commando. Rachel didn't look up. She bent down to double-check the seals on a crate of 5.56mm rounds and scribbled something on her sheet. She moved on to the weapon racks, where 2 M4s and a suppressed M9 waited. She ran her gloved hand along each sling strap, checking for fraying. Then she adjusted the Velcro on one buttstock without a word. Her motions were quiet, practiced, exact. A few yards away, an Army Ranger specialist was demonstrating a low-ready stance to a younger recruit. He caught sight of Rachel and chuckled. Hope she's not on our fire team. Wouldn't trust her to carry a water jug, let alone cover my 6. Someone nearby muttered back. That's dead weight. Man, looks like she should be taking notes, not packing mags. The insults weren't shouted. They didn't have to be. They were whispered just loud enough to be heard, thrown around with the casual cruelty that comes from misplaced confidence. None of it slowed Rachel down. She continued organizing the kit bags laid out on a folding table, checking fasteners, confirming field dressings were sealed, and marking initials beside each line item. By Oro 6:32, the first gear checks had begun. A Navy corpsman came over to check inventory tags. Rachel handed him her clipboard, her eyes scanning the rest of the layout as he signed off. He didn't say thank you. She didn't wait for one. She had already moved on, examining the clasps on a hard case holding night vision optics. Behind her, a group of Air Force Security Forces airmen had gathered near a water buffalo trailer. One of them, taller and younger, nudged his friend and whispered, "Think she even knows what those NVGs are for. Probably thinks they're goggles for night driving." The friend chuckled but said nothing. Rachel's back was to them, but she paused for a second, as if she'd heard. Then she resumed her work, pulling the MOLLE straps on a med pack and securing it tightly. What bothered them, though they couldn't say it, was that she didn't react. No red face, no sarcastic comeback, not even a shrug. She simply continued her task as though their words hadn't touched her at all. And in a way, they hadn't. At 06:47, a private accidentally dropped his loaded M4 on the concrete. Rachel moved quickly but silently, crouched and picked it up before he could. She cleared the chamber, checked the magazine, reset the safety, then handed it back without a word. The kid mumbled, "Thanks," eyes wide. She didn't respond. She had already moved to the next task. By now, a pattern had emerged. Rachel wasn't commanding. She wasn't assertive, but everything she touched was squared away. She tied loose webbing, tucked stray cables, rerouted hydration tubes through shoulder rigs. She operated like someone who knew what mattered when things got loud and ugly. The problem was, nobody was looking for that kind of expertise from someone like her. At 07:10, a sergeant major walked through the lot, eyes scanning the teams. He gave a brisk nod at the organized layout on Rachel's side. He didn't stop to ask who had done it. He probably assumed it was one of the young corporals nearby. That, too, was part of the pattern. A few minutes later, while others were testing radios and adjusting plates, Rachel sat briefly on the back of the Humvee. She removed her gloves and cleaned a pair of scratched ballistic glasses with a cloth from her breast pocket. Then she stood and went back to double-checking zippers on cold-weather bags. One soldier, a Navy petty officer, finally approached her. "Hey, logistics lady, you sure you're in the right spot? Think the admin tents are on the other side of the tarmac." His voice was bright, mocking. Rachel glanced up, just once. Then she returned to tightening a buckle on a gear strap and didn't say a word. The petty officer walked off with a laugh, shaking his head. Behind him, another soldier added, "I bet she's never even fired that thing on her hip." He nodded toward the sidearm holstered on Rachel's left thigh. "Probably doesn't even know which end the bullets come out of." The truth was, Rachel's gear was cleaner than anyone's. Her boots were well broken in, but the laces were replaced recently. Her gloves were standard issue, but the seams were reinforced with thread not typically used in base supply. Her pack was custom modified, with zip pulls swapped out for paracord knots. None of these things would catch the eye of someone looking for brawn or bravado. But to the right observer, they might have told a different story. At 07:38, the sun had risen high enough to start heating the concrete. Dust kicked up with each passing boot. The sound of Velcro, metal clasps, and clipped radio checks filled the air. Rachel stood to one side of the equipment tables, watching a fire team struggle to untangle a comms rig. Without a word, she stepped in, uncoiled the wire, adjusted the tension clip, and handed it back. Her movements were smooth and quick. She didn't stay long enough to be thanked. The group didn't say anything. One guy scowled, another just stared. A third adjusted his rifle sling and muttered, "She's just trying to look useful." By 07:51, they were lining up for final inspection. Rachel remained at the edge of the formation, slightly behind the others, near the shadow of the open supply truck. Her clipboard rested against her hip. She looked forward, not at anyone, not at anything, just waiting. Nobody noticed the quiet way she'd arranged every item. Nobody tracked the smooth rhythm of her work. But the layout passed inspection faster than any other. Clean, labeled, 0 corrections needed. Rachel didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just nodded slightly, turned, and began preparing for the next block of tasks. The others had moved on, but the camera, if it were there, would have lingered, just long enough for someone watching to start asking questions. At 08:05, Lieutenant Caleb Miller stood beside a stack of rucks, adjusting his comms harness as the final equipment checks wrapped up. He was a SEAL team officer, known for his cool under pressure and keen eye for detail. He had seen his share of operators, real ones, those who didn't need to say much because their work always spoke louder. And something about the woman by the table was starting to gnaw at the back of his mind. Rachel Dorne was crouched low, checking sling tension on a row of M4s laid out for the next team rotation. She worked alone, tugging the nylon to verify it held under stress, flipping quick release buckles, repositioning adjustable points so they wouldn't dig under a loaded carrier. Her hands moved fast but not hurried. It was a rhythm he recognized, not from schoolhouse training or logistics briefs, from missions, from prep tents in places no one talked about. Miller narrowed his eyes and took a few steps closer, pretending to adjust the chin strap on his Ops Corps helmet. Rachel didn't glance up. She was confirming serial numbers on sight mounts now, marking the log sheet with a ballpoint pen that had been wrapped in grip tape. Not something you saw much in admin types. The sling on one rifle didn't hold its tension when she leaned into it. She swapped it without hesitation, pulled a replacement from a duffel behind her, adjusted the length with 2 quick tugs, and secured it down. Then she flipped the bolt catch and ran a function check, all without looking up or announcing anything. That's when Miller saw it. When she reached for a Sharpie clipped near her left shoulder strap, her right arm twisted slightly. The fabric of her sleeve shifted just enough to expose a patch that hadn't been visible before. It wasn't Army or Air Force. It wasn't Navy Standard. It was gray, mostly, with black stitching. A rattlesnake coiled tight on a rock, its tail lifted and poised but with no sound, no official motto, no rank, no color code. Just silence. He'd seen it once before, in a closed-door briefing when he was a junior officer, a unit without name or number, no digital footprint, the kind of team you were told not to ask about twice. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, not aggressive, just curious. "You with Logistics Command?" he asked. Rachel looked up, only briefly. Her eyes were unreadable. "Just support," she said, her voice low. Miller nodded, then tapped the edge of her sleeve. "That patch. That's not standard issue." Rachel followed his glance. Her expression didn't change. She just replied, softly, "Internal unit marking. Not official." He didn't press, but something in his posture shifted, the same way it shifted before a helo insert. The moment when you realized someone beside you had been down this road before and might be even more seasoned than you. He looked back at the rifles, now perfectly aligned, each strap coiled and buckled, not one detail out of place. Behind them, someone laughed loudly. Another voice called Rachel. "Dead. Wait again." Miller didn't even turn. He wasn't hearing them anymore. His focus had locked onto something else entirely. He gave a slow nod and said nothing more. He just watched her work. Now, seeing things he hadn't seen before. Not a logistics handler. Not a background face. Someone who knew exactly how everything should function. Not because of manuals, but because she'd learned what broke under pressure. Because she'd been the one who fixed it when no one else could. Lieutenant Miller lingered near the edge of the table, pretending to check his earpiece while his eyes drifted again to the patch on Rachel's right sleeve. From a closer angle, he saw more than just the coiled rattlesnake. Below it, there were 4 small symbols, each hand-stitched in a different shade of dark thread, barely visible unless you knew to look. They weren't decorative. They were deliberate. And they weren't the kind of markings you ever saw on standard-issue uniforms. His chest tightened. He knew these symbols. Not from training manuals or official briefings. From whispered sessions in skiff rooms, late-night slides behind locked doors, redacted mission summaries passed only between operators. He'd seen that same snake above those same symbols in a sanitized report 3 years ago, and he remembered the operations tied to them. He murmured them under his breath, barely audible. White ember, glint edge, hollow sky, no echo. Each one a ghost story in the special operations community. Missions no one admitted happened. Rescue ops gone sideways. Asset extractions under direct fire. Communications blackouts in unstable regions. Lives saved because someone made the impossible work. Under pressure. Miller felt the back of his neck prickle. He wasn't looking at a logistics clerk anymore. He was looking at someone who had walked into fire and come back without fanfare. He understood now why her gear was cleaner than anyone else's. Why she moved like muscle memory ran deeper than nerves. Why she didn't flinch at the jokes or try to prove anything. She didn't have to. He straightened his posture. The casual curiosity from moments ago vanished, replaced by something closer to respect. He spoke again, but this time his tone had changed. "Ma'am," he said, "no rank, no questions, Just acknowledgement. Rachel didn't react at first. She kept working, refastening a molly loop and securing a trauma shears holster onto a plate carrier. Then she paused. Slowly, she met his eyes. Just for a second. There was no pride in her face. No challenge. Just quiet confirmation. Like she'd been seen and didn't need to explain why it mattered. Behind them, the same group of soldiers who had been joking now looked confused. One elbowed another and asked under his breath why a Navy SEAL lieutenant just called her ma'am. The others didn't answer. They only watched as Miller took a small step back, folded his arms, and remained nearby. He wasn't guarding her. He wasn't protecting her. He was recognizing her. For the first time that morning alone, someone had stopped trying to categorize Rachel Dorne and had started to understand what they were looking at. Miller looked once more at the small, almost invisible symbols on her sleeve. Each one told a story that wouldn't show up in a medal count. Each one was earned in a place too quiet for headlines, and the woman who wore them didn't need anyone's permission to matter. She already had. At 08:55, the training yard had settled into a familiar pre-roll call buzz. Teams were gathered in rough formation, boots shifting in the dust, last-minute adjustments to chest rigs and sling tension. The sun was climbing fast, casting long shadows from the tower onto the motor pool asphalt. Most of the chatter had died down. Most, but not all. Rachel stood off to the side, where logistics support typically lingered. Clipboard in hand, eyes forward. She didn't speak. She hadn't spoken all morning, just like every morning. At exactly 09:00, the gate on the west end clanked open, and Colonel Hendricks entered. No fanfare, no unnecessary motion, just the low, sure rhythm of boots that had spent more than 30 years walking across every kind of terrain a U.S. Air Force officer could stand on. He wore his cap low, sunglasses reflecting the neat rows of uniforms and rifles before him. Conversations stopped the second he crossed the center line of the yard. Hendricks didn't pause. He walked with measured steps past squads from the Army, Navy, and Air Force. His eyes scanning ranks like a man used to reading more than faces. He passed a few instructors, gave a nod, then stopped cold. Just a few feet past Rachel. His gaze dropped to her right sleeve. The emblem, the muted rattlesnake and the four symbols. Silence deepened. He turned slowly to face the formation. His voice, when it came, was low, unrushed, and sharper than anything anyone had said all morning. "Who here?" he asked. Called her dead weight. No one answered. A breeze carried across the lot, lifting the edges of flags in the distance. Someone shifted in place, the scuff of a boot breaking the silence like a gunshot. He waited. "I'm not asking." Twice. Still. No reply. Heads lowered. A few glanced sideways toward Rachel, then back at their own boots. Colonel Hendricks turned his attention fully to the group. His posture was straight, hands behind his back. When he spoke again, his tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. You think your rank or your uniform gives you the right to speak on what matters? You think someone's value is measured by how loud they shout or how much they bench? His eyes swept the group, resting for a fraction of a second on each face. No one dared meet his stare. You judged her. Not by her conduct, not by her record. You judged her by her size, her silence, her role. He stepped closer to the center, boots crunching on gravel. "Let me make something clear." He pointed one gloved hand back at Rachel. "That woman has more time in theater than anyone here. She has operated under blackout, behind enemy lines, without QRF. She's carried wounded through firefights, called in danger-close air support under direct fire, and walked out with every member of her team still breathing." His voice didn't rise, but the weight behind it did. "And you called her dead weight." He turned fully now, facing Rachel, She hadn't moved. She stood at parade rest, eyes forward, same as before. No change in expression. No need. Hendricks gave her a single nod, then turned back to the formation. If you don't know who you're working beside, that's not on them. That's on you. No one dared speak. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was earned. Colonel Hendricks let the silence sit, as heavy as the sun on their shoulders. He looked over the group again, slower this time, like he wanted each face to feel the weight of what they'd said and what they'd missed. His voice was quieter now, but sharper somehow. That's Captain Rachel Dorne, United States Air Force, Special Tactics Officer, call sign, grayscale. A ripple passed through the formation. A few heads snapped up. One of the younger airmen blinked hard, like he'd just been told a ghost was standing 10 feet away. She flew A-10s in Kandahar, multiple tours, logged over 800 combat hours in hostile airspace, supported infantry units with danger-close fire while taking AAA herself. She didn't fly from 10,000 feet and drop J-dams. She got low. She stayed until the last man moved. That's who she is. He turned slightly, his hand open toward her, but his eyes stayed on the formation. And when she wasn't flying, she operated as a forward air controller on the ground, embedded with special units in places no one admits we ever were. She coordinated gun runs and medevacs in blackout conditions. She ran Overwatch in places where backup didn't come. Rachel didn't move. She stood still, arms behind her back, face calm, not proud, just present. The colonel's voice dropped again. Some of you joke about patches. That one on her sleeve. The snake. You won't find it in any official unit chart. You won't read about those missions. They didn't exist, but people who came back from them, they don't joke about that patch. They remember who made sure they came home. A murmur came from the second row. A ranger specialist stepped forward, eyes down. Sir, I made one of the comments. I didn't know. The words were just dumb. He swallowed. I'm sorry. Rachel finally moved. She turned her head, just slightly, to look at him. Her expression didn't shift much, but her voice was calm, measured. You reacted to what you saw. That's natural. But next time, consider that what you see might not be the whole story. The ranger nodded once, face burning. Yes, ma'am. Colonel Hendricks let out a slow breath and looked across the group once more. You all carry gear, weapons, radios. Some of you carry rank. She carries something heavier, a history written in silence. You'd do well to remember that next time you start judging based on volume or size. He checked his watch, adjusted his cap, and stepped back. Training begins in 15. That's time enough for everyone here to figure out what kind of soldier they want to be. The formation remained still as he walked away, but the shift had already begun. You could feel it. Not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet collapse of false certainty, replaced by something deeper, something earned. By 12:35, most of the teams had cleared the lot, heading toward chow or the after-action review in the ops tent. The hum of conversation faded, replaced by the click of toolkits and the distant thump of a rotor from the airfield. The training yard looked deserted, but Rachel Dorne was still there, kneeling beside a folding table near the weapons rack. She moved with the same quiet focus she'd shown all morning. Her gloves were off now, hands bare, fingers working over the exposed internals of a well-worn M4. She popped the pins, removed the upper receiver, and began a methodical inspection of each part. Bolt carrier, firing pin, extractor, each cleaned, wiped, and checked. No wasted motion, no shortcuts. She didn't speak, didn't look around. Her back faced the yard, as if the world beyond the table didn't matter. The sun was high now, casting hard light across the cement. She worked in the shadow of the Humvee, her silhouette low and steady. A pair of boots stopped a few feet away. Not heavy, not rushed, just tentative. "Excuse me, ma'am." She looked up, eyes meeting a young private who stood stiffly, hands behind his back like he wasn't sure what he'd just interrupted. Would you mind showing me how to field strip a rifle like that? Without looking? I mean, Rachel studied him for a moment. There was no mockery in his tone, no sarcasm, just an honest question, carried on a voice trying not to shake. Why, she asked, wiping down the bolt carrier group? He hesitated. Because you can do it like you've done it for real. And I want to be better at my job. Rachel nodded once. Set the rifle down. Show me how you do it now. The private stepped forward, unshouldered his weapon, and placed it on the table. He began disassembling it, following the standard manual procedure. It was careful but clunky. He paused too often, fumbled twice with the charging handle. When he finished, she didn't say anything. She simply slid the parts aside and gestured again. Now, do it again. Eyes closed. He blinked. Close your eyes, she repeated. If you can't do it blind, you can't do it when it matters. He obeyed. Fumbled more this time. Lost track of the takedown pin. Almost dropped the bolt. Rachel didn't interrupt. She didn't correct every mistake. She let him find each moment of uncertainty. Now pause, she said. Listen to your hands. Don't rush. Feel for the resistance. Feel where each part fits. You'll know when it's right. The private exhaled slowly and tried again. This time his fingers hesitated less. Still not smooth, but closer. Rachel stepped beside him, guided his grip slightly on the charging handle, adjusted the way he held the lower receiver. She didn't raise her voice or offer praise. She just stayed close, steady. By 12:51, 2 other soldiers had drifted closer. They didn't say anything, just watched. One of them finally asked, "Ma'am, could you show us that technique too?" Rachel looked up. Her face was unreadable. Then she nodded. Form a circle. Everyone gets a turn. Within 10 minutes, there were 7 of them. Infantry, Navy, Air Force, 1 Marine, a mixed group. All silent now, watching her, mimicking her, trying to copy the rhythm of her hands. She didn't preach, didn't share stories, just demonstrated. She showed them how to confirm bolt lock without vision, how to recognize carbon buildup by feel, how to fold a sling by touch so it wouldn't snag when thrown over a vest. She taught them how to trust their hands in low light, how to memorize the weight of readiness. At one point, someone asked why she emphasized these small techniques so much. Because under stress, the basics fall apart first. She said, "You don't rise to the occasion. You fall to your level of training. So make that level count." The words weren't dramatic. They weren't delivered like a speech. But they landed. No one interrupted. No one joked. They moved as one group now, each taking turns under her quiet guidance. The rhythm of disassembly and reassembly became a shared language. Wipe, slide, check, lock, again. At 13:18, Rachel stepped back. The young private who'd asked first stood beside her, breathing hard like he'd just finished a PT test. "Thank you, ma'am." I didn't know how much I didn't know. Rachel gave him the faintest nod. "Remember it when it counts," she said, "and pass it on when you can." Others echoed the thanks. She didn't smile, but she didn't walk away either. They began to break down the table, repack cleaning kits, reset rifles into racks. One by one, they left with slower steps, quieter gestures, not out of fear, out of awareness, out of respect. Rachel remained behind. She holstered her sidearm, rechecked her inventory sheet, and started loading gear into the back of the Humvee, just like she had at the beginning. But now, when others passed by, they nodded, not out of obligation, out of recognition. The teacher in the shadows hadn't asked for attention. She had earned something better. Trust. By 14:10, the energy on base had shifted. It wasn't loud. There was no announcement. No formal memo had gone out. But you could feel it. The side glances had stopped. The whispers had gone quiet. The dismissive tones. The half-jokes about logistics or size or silence, they just weren't there anymore. Rachel walked across the yard carrying a weapons sling over one shoulder and a tool pouch under her arm. A pair of infantry corporals moved aside to clear her path, one of them giving her a small nod. She nodded back without breaking stride. It wasn't forced. It wasn't performative. It was habit. One learned in places where movement and respect had no fanfare. She stopped by the bench outside the armory and set the pouch down. An airman walked by, paused, then circled back. "Ma'am, do you know if the armorers are still taking inspections for the NVGs?" Rachel glanced at the clock on the wall just above the bench. "They'll take them till 1500. She didn't smile, didn't soften her tone. But it wasn't cold either. It was clear, direct, professional. "Thanks," he said, and left with a little more purpose in his step. Someone else passed by and didn't say anything, but slowed down enough to watch her work. Her hands moved over the edge of a strap she was adjusting, then back to the quick release. The same way she always did. Nothing about her routine had changed. But now, people noticed it. By 1440, a Marine gunnery sergeant was waiting near the Humvee bay when Rachel returned to drop off a completed checklist. He didn't interrupt her. He just watched as she moved around the vehicle, checked the rear tie-downs, and repositioned the cargo net so it wouldn't snag. When she was done, she looked up, just slightly. He didn't ask questions, just gave her a nod, a deep one, then walked off. Rachel didn't need to explain anything. Not about the sleeve, not about the symbols. The story had already been told in the silence she maintained, in the way others now carried themselves differently when she was nearby. Respect wasn't spoken. It lived in actions. Just like it always had. The afternoon passed quickly. She completed her rounds, double-checked gear logs, and resecured the comms crates. Near the water point, a group of junior troops were talking about field exercises. One of them looked up as she walked by and stopped mid-sentence. "Ma'am," he said, "that thing you showed about blind breakdowns, would you be willing to show it to the rest of our section sometime?" Rachel paused. "If your NCO clears it, I'll be there." He nodded, almost relieved. "Thank you." She kept walking. At 15:30, she returned to the supply line. Everything was where it should be. Neat rows, packed bags, strapped down equipment. Nothing fancy, nothing heroic, just what needed to be done. She crouched down to check the last strap on a generator crate. Tugged it twice. Tight, secured. Someone, somewhere behind her, was still watching. They always were now. But it didn't feel like scrutiny anymore. It felt like awareness. Rachel stood, dusted off her gloves, and looked across the yard one last time. It was just another afternoon, but not quite. Not for them. Not for her. The thread on her sleeve hadn't changed. Same dull stitching. Same coiled snake. Same marks beneath. But now, those tiny emblems had meaning to others too. Not because she'd explained them, but because she didn't have to. They weren't decorations. They were reminders of missions that never made the news, of people who got to go home, of decisions made in the dark by someone who didn't ask for credit. That thread wasn't for her. It was for them. For every name she still remembered. For every lesson that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Some stories are sewn into the smallest corners of a uniform, and once you see them, you don't forget. Not every warrior looks like one. Not every hero steps forward when the spotlight turns on. Sometimes, the strongest person in the room is the quietest. The one who doesn't correct your assumptions. The one who doesn't speak just to be heard. And sometimes, that silence hides a history you'll never know unless you learn to look closer. In combat, judgment isn't just unfair, it's dangerous. It costs seconds you can't afford. Attention you didn't give, respect withheld when it mattered most. The same is true outside of combat, too. We carry assumptions like gear slung carelessly over one shoulder, forgetting the weight it puts on others. We call people weak because they don't match the image in our head. But strength doesn't ask for recognition. It does the job anyway. Respect isn't volume. It's steadiness. It's doing the work when no one's looking. It's noticing the loose strap on someone else's gear and fixing it without a word. It's understanding that leadership starts long before titles. That leadership, real leadership, is often the person who makes sure everything is ready so no one else has to worry. And they do it every day without needing to be thanked. There are people who've saved lives and never told the stories. People who've carried others out of fire and walked away as if it were nothing. They don't wear medals in plain view. They don't need a podium. They show up. They pay attention. They lead with consistency. So, before you dismiss someone as useless, think about what they might be carrying. A past they can't share. A lesson they learned the hard way. Or maybe someone they brought home who never would have made it without them. There are those who change everything by doing the simple things perfectly, again and again, without needing to be noticed. You don't have to know their story to show respect. You just have to understand that some stories are written in silence, and the people who carry them, they don't need to speak, because what they've done already says enough.